It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
In my lifetime, we've faced 2 world wars, a war in Korea, and then Vietnam. And I know this: I want our children never to have to face another. A president's most important job is to secure peace, not just now, but for the lifetimes of our children. But it takes a strong America to build a peace that lasts. And I believe with all my heart that working together, we have made America stronger and prouder and more secure today. And now, we can work toward a lasting peace for our children and their children to come. Peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. Today, America is prepared for peace. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it, now or ever.
So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted. You know, when I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, under my plan of a cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
Mark Levin here as we celebrate the 100th birthday of the great Ronald Reagan. Our number, 877-381-3811. 877-381-3811. Gee, you think there's a little difference between a great president and a very poor one? Reagan believed in this country. Reagan loved this country to its core. Reagan loved the people of this country. He loved liberty. He loved capitalism. He loved our history. He loved our founding fathers. He loved the Declaration and the Constitution. He was so proud of being the president of the greatest nation on the face of the earth. His chest was always out, his back always bored stiff, never bowed to a soul. And he loved being president. And he wanted to make a difference. Not transform the society, but embrace it. Not drag this society in a direction it didn't want to go in, but to lead it. I'll tell you a little history. I have a great deal of experience working in the Reagan campaigns and in the Reagan administration. But in 1974, August of 1974, I believe, I was 15 years old. And I took that train ride to Philadelphia from just outside the city boundaries where I lived. I used to take this train into Philadelphia to go to Independence Hall to look at the building where Thomas Jefferson stayed and wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. I would go to Independence Hall, and I would just stand there and stare at the chair that George Washington sat in. I wanted to know who stood where. I wanted to know if the inkwells and the spittoons were original, and the floorboards. I wanted to know about this sanctified ground. And I would walk down the street where Betsy Ross's house was. And I'd go around the corner where the first customs building was. And on and on and on. I just couldn't get enough of our great history. I've talked about this many times, and I've written about it many times. Right there in that one building, the Declaration of Independence was signed. Right there in that building, the Constitution was drafted and signed. on a wing of that building, which had been and was the Pennsylvania Assembly Building. Congress met for the first several years of the Republic. The lower house was actually where the House of Representatives met, on the street floor. Then you would go upstairs and the Senate was up there. That's why they call it the upper house. Not because it's better, but because it was upstairs. It's a relatively small room in that building where the Supreme Court met. It's amazing. All right there. Then you'd go out front, and there were stone memorials, including one to Abraham Lincoln, who gave a speech in front of Independence Hall, and John Kennedy, who gave a speech in front of Independence Hall. The other side of the building was the Liberty Bell, with the big crack. Amazing. I'd walk a couple blocks. There was an old cemetery there, where Benjamin Franklin was buried. And I could tell you so much more. But in August 1974, there was a man who was coming to Philadelphia to give a speech. And I was, even then, interested in conservatism and politics. So I took that train down to Philadelphia, because I wanted to hear that man speak. He's 15 years old. And I recall my older brother Doug was with me. And I listened to him speak. And I was swept away. I'd never heard anything like this in my life. This man wasn't a politician. This man was a statesman. Oozing charisma. Plain-spoken. A happy man. A decent, genuine human being. It was Ronald Reagan. From that moment, that speech, that August, 1974, I'd already been a very young conservative gentleman in terms of what I read and so forth. That sealed it. I worked in his campaign in 1976 in Pennsylvania, where they said he didn't have a chance. 1976. In the Republican primary. Running against the sitting president. Who does that? The establishment Republican Party in Pennsylvania is just that. It was a gutless, visionless party, like so many of the Republican establishment parties along the East Coast and in New England. Republican leaders. My dad was with me on one occasion when they were telling us Reagan can't win in Pennsylvania. He's too conservative. Or Reagan's stupid. He's an actor. From Republican. I ignored them. I loathed these losers, these Republicans who didn't want to win, these Republicans who didn't understand. They meant nothing to me. I was 17 at the time. The Reagan campaign had decided it didn't have that much in terms of resources, and they certainly couldn't expend a lot of money in the state of Pennsylvania, or as we called it, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But there were still a handful of young Turks that didn't much give a damn, and we still worked very, very hard to promote Reagan as a write-in candidate. I pretty much handled southeastern Pennsylvania. A bunch of my buddies handled other counties. Some were out there in Allegheny County, in Erie. We did everything we could. We lost, of course. Reagan almost won that primary, meaning the Republican primary. He almost defeated Gerald Ford. And at that convention, as is well known now, after Ford spoke, Reagan spoke. And after Reagan spoke, the delegates realized what a terrible mistake they had made. They nominated the wrong man for president. Ronald Reagan always fought the Republican establishment. He fought it in 1966 to get the Republican nomination for governor of California. He fought it in 1976, and he fought it again in 1980 against the Bush family, to be perfectly blunt about it. He was not an establishment Republican of any kind. He was a conservative. He was a right-winger. And when he lost in 1976, he made a little statement. I'm digging for it here, Mr. Producer. Maybe you can help. And he made a little statement at a little press conference. Here's what he said. Cut 3, go.
Sure, there's a disappointment in what happened, but the cause goes on. And don't get cynical. Don't get cynical, because look at yourselves and what you were willing to do, and recognize that there are millions and millions of Americans out there that want what you want, that want it to be that way, that want it to be a shining city on a hill.
On the plane going back, I went over and I had a convention ticket, and I asked him if he'd sign it as a souvenir. And what he wrote was, "We fought, we dreamed, and the dream is still with us." And looking back on it now, he never gave up. He just kept right on going. It was this incredible crushing defeat, and it didn't crush him. Just came back up, shook his head, and said, "Okay, what's next?" And that began the campaign for the year 1980.
Yep. He never said never. He was always underestimated. We're going to spend a lot of time on the great Ronald Reagan on this program today, and almost no time on Barack Obama. There's nothing new going on in Egypt, although there's something I want to say about it. And let me just preface it by saying this. I have concluded, although it's not a perfect distinction, but I have concluded that the old Reaganites, and I guess I'm one of them, and the Bush 43 guys, we don't see eye to eye on what's going on in Egypt. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some overlap. So I'm speaking generally. Reagan wanted democracy spread throughout the world, but not at the cost of defeating an ally. He wanted to see democracy spread in lieu of communism. He didn't look for fights among allies. He looked to destroy the Soviet Union. He looked to destroy the communist footholds in the Western Hemisphere. He looked to destroy communist satellites in Africa and other parts of the world. But he wasn't going around picking fights with allies who weren't democratic. He would have thought that was crazy. Hence his comments about the Shah of Iran that I've played the other day, and I'll play again. Democracy project, human rights project. The project is the American project. What's prudent? What's realistic? When we come back, more Ronald Reagan.
Mr. President, in talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you have blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.
There you go. Solid as a rock and funny as hell. I met the gentleman several times, and he always had a good joke. But he always knew who he was, Barack Obama. He never looked back and said, I'm Lincoln, I'm FDR. No, he was Ronald Reagan. We'll be right back.
There is a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
This was America in 1980, held in contempt by foreign nations. Across the world, people were losing their freedoms. So many countries thought America had seen its day, but we knew better. So we stopped complaining together and started working together. Today, America is strong again. We're looking to the future with confidence and pride. America's best days and democracy's best days lie ahead.
And if there's any doubt whatsoever of Reagan's philosophy, then I'm going to remind you about his philosophy. If there is any doubt where he stood on government-run health care, I'm going to remind you where he stood on government-run health care. 1961, cut one, go.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program.
You say that today, there are certain people who try to dismiss you, and yet they say they long for the days of Ronald Reagan. That's 50 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. And since then, the country has gone much further left, and today it's lurching left. I don't mean the people. I mean the government. I mean the establishment. What would they have said about Ronald Reagan after Tucson? What do you think Reagan would have said about the Tea Party movement? Mike Reagan was on here last week. He told you he would have loved it because Ronald Reagan is the founding father of the Tea Party movement.